What happened to vulnerable girls here in Rochdale, but in Rotherham and Telford as well, at the hands of grooming gangs was simply appalling. Now, last year I said that if I became Prime Minister, I wanted to take decisive action to stamp out this evil, and that's what we're announcing today: a new expert police-led task force, tougher sentencing, and a new legal duty on those working with children to report abuse. I won't rest until we make sure that our children can grow up in an environment that's safe and secure.
But the language of this announcement is interesting, and it's drawn a bit of criticism, hasn't it? We have the Home Secretary yesterday talking about British Asian gangs in particular, and you'll know that the data shows that the vast majority of perpetrators in this area are actually white men under 30. Chief prosecutors say that it's a distraction to focus on this particular ethnicity group, and the NSPCC aren't happy about it. Why are you focusing in on this when the data shows that it's actually not how it pans out?
Well, all forms of child sexual exploitation carried out by whomever are horrific and wrong, but with the specific issue of grooming gangs, we've had several independent inquiries look at the incidents here in Rochdale, but in Rotherham and Telford. And what's clear is that when victims and other whistleblowers came forward, their claims were often ignored by social workers, local politicians, or even the police. And the reason that they were ignored were due to cultural sensitivity and political correctness. Now, that's not right. These crimes are horrific, and that's why the actions that we're announcing today are right, and they have been welcomed by people, and I've been speaking to survivors today and others involved. They will make a big difference in helping us root out the evil perpetrated by grooming gangs.
Yeah, but why is the Home Secretary talking specifically about targeting British Asian gangs when the figures are just not borne out by that? There's not a disproportionate amount of British Asian gangs perpetrating this crime. So why is the Home Secretary honing in on that in particular?
All forms of child sexual exploitation and abuse are wrong, wherever they happen and perpetrated by whomever. With the specific issue of grooming gangs in particular, well, we've had inquiries, independent inquiries into the incidences at Rochdale, Rotherham, Telford. It is clear that when victims or whistleblowers raise concerns with people, those concerns were ignored, and often the reasons that they were ignored were put down to people wanting to be not culturally insensitive or because of political correctness, and that's not right. It can't be right that people's claims are ignored because of those reasons. So it's right that we focus on this. The new expert police-led task force that's being created today will have far better use of data and analytics to identify perpetrators so we can stop this awful crime from happening in the future, because sadly it is still happening, and we're not going to rest until we make sure that all our communities are safe for young girls.
Why do you need more evidence to introduce the mandatory reporting? We have had a whole public inquiry on this. Do you accept, in all honesty, that the government have been quite slow to act on this? You're only announcing this now. There's been a public inquiry into mandatory reporting. Labour recommended it 10 years ago. Do you accept that the government have been slower than they should have been?
Well, last year I said that if I became Prime Minister, this is something that I would act on, and I've been Prime Minister a few months, and we are taking decisive action today to root out the evil perpetrated by grooming gangs. We've got tougher sentencing, we've got a new police task force, and yes, we're responding to the recommendation of an independent inquiry to introduce a legal duty on those working with children to report abuse. Now, it's important that we get that right, and we will work with all the agencies involved to make sure we implement that in a way that is practical and effective. But it's right that we respond to the independent inquiry's recommendation, and I'm pleased that we're putting that in place today.
So you don't accept criticism that the government's dragged its feet in getting to grips with child sexual exploitation, given that the big events happened a decade ago?
I said I said last year, before I became Prime Minister, that if I did become Prime Minister, I would take decisive action to clamp out the evil caused and perpetrated by grooming gangs. Today's announcements represent the most robust response of any government to tackle this awful crime. We're going to have tougher sentencing, we're having a new police-led expert task force, and a legal duty on those working with children to report abuse, together with better use of data and analytics, and making sure that political correctness and cultural sensitivities don't stand in the way of keeping young girls in particular safe. That's very important to me. I said it was last year. I'm acting on it today.
I just have one more question, Prime Minister. Do you actually know how many sex abusers operate in grooming gangs?
Well, I said,
Do you know the scale of that?
Yeah, sadly, as we know from the independent reports that have been concluded, this is happening in communities up and down our country.
Do you know the numbers, though? Do you know the numbers?
That's why we need to do a better job. And we don't know the numbers because it's not reported. And that's part of why what we're putting in place today is to make it easier for people to come forward, and part of who I've been talking to today, whether that's the MPCC and others, is making it easier for whistleblowers to come forward and report these awful crimes, because too often in the past they didn't, because they feared what would happen to them, they feared that they wouldn't be taken seriously, they were afraid of offending people. That's all wrong, and that's why one of the things that we're introducing today is strengthening the whistleblowing hotline so that people can report these crimes, and introducing a legal duty on those working with children to also report abuse, so that we can properly identify all the people who are suffering and then go after them and make sure that we root out this evil.
I must ask you about teachers. They've rejected that offer. What's your reaction to that? And are you really considering taking away that £1,000 one-off payment?
Well, I'm extremely disappointed with the actions of the NEU Teaching Union. The government, after dialogue, made what I consider to be a very reasonable pay offer worth around 8% on average for a teacher and up to 13% for new teachers, combined with working with the unions to reduce the workload and burden on teachers, something that they had asked for. And in spite of all of that, and I said very reasonable offer on pay, the NEU union has rejected that, announced new strike dates, which will be enormously damaging to our children who have already suffered, their education has already suffered as a result of COVID, and in the run-up to exams, to hear about new strike dates in the face of what is a very reasonable pay offer, I think is extremely disappointing news.
Gillian Keegan thinks that the government are considering taking away that £1,000 one-off payment. Is that an option?
As I said, we've made a very reasonable pay offer worth around 8% on average for teachers, worth 13% for new teachers, combined with reductions on workload, and for the NEU Teaching Union to be striking in the face of that and impacting children's education, particularly in the run-up to exams, is extremely disappointing. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister, thank you.